Congress has signed a new bill, everybody. Americans are eligible to claim an extra $125, and extra bonus relief checks. This comes as state officials pass new relief legislation. Indiana has another budget surplus, and Governor Eric Holcomb wanted to disperse to people in the state. Early this month, the governor announced he wanted to distribute $1 billion in tax relief to help people in the state dealing with inflation. Now this week, he has announced plans to call lawmakers back into a special session on July 6th. Under his plan, each taxpayer will receive about $225, and that's in addition to the $125 of automatic tax refund that the governor pledged to each Indiana taxpayer. Another 2 million people in the state have already received a $125 tax refund by direct deposit. Refunds for more than 2 million other Indiana taxpayers are still being processed, and state officials expect them to be mailed later this summer. Now, people in the state, such as the governor's office, said earlier this year that 4.3 million Indiana residents will get an automatic $125 refund. That means that just under half of the tax refunds have been processed so far. And now, everybody, Congress also passed a bill extending some food assistance measures for anti-hunger advocates. They have called for critical care as more parents struggle with the rising cost of inflation. Less than a week before the measures were set to end, crisis-era child nutrition waivers helped millions of people get access to the meals in both school and during the summer weeks. Now, the bipartisan legislation now heads to the president's desk for his signature. It would extend some of the dozens of child nutrition waivers that Congress gave the Agricultural Department. Would not extend the most groundbreaking rules of the federal waivers, one that made school breakfast and lunches free to all students regardless of their families. Now, after passing House Representatives bill, the bill went to the Senate before the Senate. Now, after passing the House Representatives through a majority vote, the bill went before the Senate, where Rand Paul pushed for the return of the reduced price meat category. The bill passed unanimously in the Senate, with that change as the clock ticked toward getting the bill passed in time, forcing the bill back to the House of Representatives for a second vote with the revision in place. Having to pay for reduced price meals is significant for many families. Before March 2020, children and families whose incomes were at or below 130% of the federal poverty level were eligible for free school meals, while those in families whose incomes were 135% of the poverty level were eligible for reduced price meals.
To inquire.
Secretary Yellen, thank you so much for being here, and I'd like to follow up on a letter that Senator Elizabeth Warren and I sent to you and Commissioner Reddick in April. This letter requested information on steps that Treasury and IRS are taking to ensure that low-income taxpayers are not unfairly audited at far greater rates, and we are still awaiting a response. I'm encouraged that Treasury's budget request highlights the need for new resources and especially new skilled staff, including revenue agents, to focus on tax fairness and audits of large businesses, partnerships, and high-wealth individuals. How would these resources change the audit strategy of the IRS to lift the unfair burden?
Very important news is here, everybody. Millions of Americans are expected to receive a $500 one-time crisis relief payment stimulus check by September. These new checks can be automatically deposited. Here's some good news on this. Colorado and your state, people are set to receive a stimulus check of $500. If tax returns are filed after June 30th but before October 17th, then people in Colorado will receive the check in cash in January. Now, individual taxpayers will pocket about $500, while joint filers will get a $1,000 payment. The governor said, "We are helping people in Colorado deal with inflation by getting people back their hard-earned money this summer. We are providing immediate relief for hardworking people in the state." Inflation rocketed to 8.6% in May, its highest level since December. The payments are being introduced as part of the Senate bill, legislation that refunds up to 85% of excess state revenue. Hundreds of thousands of Americans will also get a check in the mailbox. The state of Maine is sending up to 200,000 payments each week under its tax rebate program until everybody gets a check. To qualify for a rebate check in the state, you must meet a few requirements. As far as income goes, as individuals must not exceed $100,000, while heads of the household and couples can make up to $150,000 and $200,000 respectively. These will be based on 2021 tax returns, which must be filed by October 31st. Also, you must not be claimed as a dependent under the tax return to qualify for the rebate. The Department of Administrative Financial Affairs told reporters that it is processing checks at the peak capacity of 200,000 checks per week. There is no specific order by which the payments are going out. And consumer sentiment has hit a record low in June as Americans continue to face elevated gas prices for gas, food, and other services. Inflation, which last increased at the fastest pace in more than 40 years as of May, remained a pressing concern and a key contributor to the further erosion in sentiment. Last week, a Conference Board survey found that 60% of CEOs said they expect a recession before the end of 2023. Economic teams at the Wall Street firms from Goldman Sachs to Citigroup have also raised their expectation over the risk of a recession over the next year.
Recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Buchanan, to inquire.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I want to thank you for your service. You and I just talked briefly a few minutes ago, but my passion is really to look at the big picture in terms of debt and deficits. If you look over the last 15 years, everybody talks about reducing the deficits, and that we've ran up almost $20 trillion in debt in the last 15 years or so. So what can we do about that? But also I want to how does that tie in your opinion, to inflation? The last 4 or 5 years, or last couple of years, we ran into $4 or $5 trillion of additional spending. They like to spend another $2 trillion, but everybody feels in our area that it's impacting inflation in a big year, and it's killing a lot. I'm in Florida, so a lot of our seniors count on a slight raise here and there, and this deficit is really hurting them badly. So what's your thought between spending and inflation? It seems like there's a connection.
Well, so spending has come down, government spending and the deficit have come down dramatically. We had a substantial response to the pandemic, which was appropriate. It succeeded in getting our economy back to full employment and mitigating a great deal of harm in that way. I think it was very successful. But there's no question that inflation is unacceptably high and we need to get it down. And it's partly a matter of demand and supply. And the Federal Reserve has a primary responsibility.
Madam Secretary, we're just short on time. Let me ask you just quickly, in terms of interest rates rising, it's impacting a lot of people. In the 70s, you know, we had inflation. We used that as I think, our major tool to try to tap down inflation. But as you raise interest now, 50 basis points or 100 basis, you're probably talking $300 billion in additional taxes. It doesn't seem like we can continue to raise rates because of the massive deficits and the debt that we have. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, interest rates at the beginning of the pandemic were exceptionally low to try to help the economy recover, and that resulted in really a negative burden of the debt on the U.S. economy. I think the most important measure of the burden of the debt on the U.S. is the real net interest that we have to pay.
Let me just add, Madam Secretary.
And we always projected.
The gentleman from South Carolina.